So I've been reviewing all kinds of mini PCs lately, and there was one particular comment I was getting all the time, and this is absolutely a valid reason for. The mini PCs you actually see over here are brand new models with all kinds of different Intel chips in the inside, different form factor, but also different prices. But all of them have one thing in common, that they're mini, they're compact, and of course they're kinda expensive compared with some used products. And what do I mean with used? Stay tuned and let's talk about it. Hey, it's awesome that you're tuning in, because in this video we are going to take a close look at one of those emulation options that can be very cheap. This is the Pro Desk from HP, a very thin model. They also call it, I think, a thin client. You have bigger models out there, but this is one of those mini PCs actually you can pick up for not a lot of money. So take consideration when you're having an HP Pro Desk, there are all kinds of different versions out there when it comes to the Intel chips. And yep, with the chips we're also having different prices and also where you're looking for them. So this is the Intel Core i5. Later on we're going to do a chit chat about the specifications, but first let's take a close look at all the capabilities these things have when it comes to plugging in devices. So at the front we're having two outputs for a headphone jack, and even one is for a dedicated microphone that we're not going to actually be using so far. But then a USB-C and two USB 3.0 ports at the front. And of course an on and off switch. The input for the power supply, the RJ45 for Ethernet for USB 3.0. So that's going to be very interesting for, let's say, the hard drive or the extra controllers. And display port out, and VGA and another display port. And I think that's also one of the biggest downside to these things, that it comes with two display ports. Nevertheless, there are converters out there, and I do have one, so that we're going to be using today for an HDMI out. Construction wise, this is absolutely a great system to modify. You can open it up fairly easy. The only thing you need to do is remove this tiny screw, or at least loosen it up. And yeah, this thing comes with a built-in SSD, 256 gigabytes. So if you're going to be reflashing this with a Batocera image, you can just start building your Batocera image fairly easy. Of course, I recommend getting a 1-2 terabyte one, so simply because you need to have more space. And that SSD in that price range is more expensive than ever. But there are different configurations that you consider. So if you don't want to switch out the eternal, let's say, storage capacity because you still want to use Windows, you can also do it a different way. Pad or Kinhank have these Batocera hard drive you can pick up. They come with different kind of sizes. I think it was 500 gigabyte, 1 terabyte and 2 terabyte. What you can actually do is with a USB connection, you're leaving in the hard drive and you can just boot up into Windows if you want to, and at the back, if you have a USB 3.0, I really recommend in 3.0, and of course in 3.0 enclosure, you can just connect this thing with your mini PC and boot it into Batocera. But this video I'm going to be unplugging this because we're not going to be using the Windows, simply because I want to build yourself a retro game machine for not a lot of money, but still have a lot of potential and a lot of retro emulation performance. If you're not buying it from, let's say, a company, some companies will give you an option to have it has been cleaned, and that is actually what they did with this particular model. So I did pay a little bit more than normal, but we do have the option to have a clean system. Or you can just do it all by yourself, of course, if you have this, let's say, bought from a flea market or a thrift shop whatsoever. So the construction also for the SSD is very easy made. You can just click it out if you want to. But of course, in my case, I'm messing it up because you need to open up the lip over here. You can just click it out and that's it. But when it comes to this particular product, let's remove also the bracket, because underneath I do already see some interesting options for upgrading. And also, how is it with, let's say, the memory? Can we upgrade that? Is it single channel? Is it dual channel? Very important things that we need to double check. So let's remove this bracket and I will show you. This machine itself is dual channel, so we don't need to upgrade that. Construction wise, this thing has been made very well. So for example, if you just want to change out the RAM, it can be done fairly easy. We're just removing this over here. At this point they're using Samsung modules. So far I can just actually see the first one, but also the second one on no, let's say, mix of brands. But it can be changed out fairly easy. And if you need to clean up, you can just do it, remove it when it comes to all of the parts. So I must say that this is absolutely an overall great piece of technology. So let's put it back together. Let's put it back together, yes. But what is also kind of deluxe, that we even have the option to use yourself an NVMe. So that's one of those, let's say, more affordable, and especially in the future where they're getting cheaper with 1 and 2 terabytes, that is one of those like cool ways you can upgrade your system. So that's absolutely awesome to see that we even having more, like I said, multiple different ways to add ourselves storage capacity, and of course an old school M2. So there are different ways to play, but also upgrade the system if you want to use it in Windows, but also want to use it with Battlezera. So it's absolutely crazy to think about how much you can do with such an, let's say, tiny device. But if you're going to be setting up a Battlezera drive, the first thing that we need to do is disable the secure boot, otherwise it will not boot up into Battlezera. So let's do that first. The menu can be different of the model of mini PC you're actually using. But as also when you want to get into the BIOS, some require to use F9, Dell, and also in different, like Dell, having the Dell over here, but also Dell with the numpad. And in my case, I just needed to use Escape. So double check always, if you're not getting into the BIOS, go Google the model number or the model version product you're having, and it will explain how you need to get into it. But let's take a close look at the menu, what we're going to be switching out. Depends on what kind of mainboard or BIOS inside of the machine itself. So where can we actually find it? So in this case we're having Advanced, where we find the secure boot configuration. In here we have the legacy support disable and secure boot enable. In here we need to disable it, and when we've done this we need to save and go all the way back. And the reason why in this case we can just go save changes and exit. Yep, I want to. And then we're going to be booting up into the Battlezera image. But it can give problems when it comes to Windows itself. So that's the reason I'm not a big fan of, let's say, the dual boot situation. And if everything seems to be working, you're having the Battlezera boot up screen. Depending on how big your hard drive and the files you've installed, depending how long it will take for booting up the firmware or software itself. So one thing you need to take consideration if you have a problem with the boot up screen. So it shows the Battlezera, it shows the first boot up screen, but if it doesn't show the second screen, that is due of, let's say, sometimes the compatibility of the firmware. So what you need to do is getting an older PC or just download the latest version of Battlezera to know for sure that it will boot up with your mini PC. Okay, another issue I've noticed with some of these mini PCs that they have a built-in, let's say, speaker. So how you need to fix that? Normally you're going to the output of the audio configuration, but in this case we didn't have a lot of options. So what you need to do is basically leave that audio if you want to, but next thing you need to go into the audio profile. And here we're finding all the different ways you can actually go to. Here we can switch between the speaker inside the thing. Can be convenient if no speakers inside of your monitor. But it's one of those ways you can actually mess around with it. So by the way, an option you don't have with every single mini PC. But that's actually how you need to fix that issue when it comes to some of these, let's say, mini PCs with a built-in speaker. That's such a weird thing. But how is it with the emulation? There we're going to be a significant difference if you're looking at the price range of a Super Conflicts mini PC you're buying now. So Battlezera also comes with so much more possibilities when it comes to emulators. Think about GameCube and some other like ones that will run slightly, maybe sometimes way better, depending of course how much power you're basically having when it comes to a mini PC. All the way from the 8-bit, 60-bit era, think about the Mega Drive or Genesis, to PlayStation 1 that runs on the cheap devices just fine. But where I just want to focus is N64. That is one of those devices that runs absolutely horrible on most of these cheap boxes. So, and again, take consideration, if you want to run PlayStation 2 and 3, we do need to have a lot of power. And that is the thing with these, let's say, i5s we're having over here. We have maybe enough power. That's what we're going to be finding out. But another thing I just wanted to check out, it is also interesting, if you want to go into the game list, we have the option even to upscale. So going to the advanced option by holding the A, here I have the option to mess around with some emulators, but also with the internal resolution. And we're going to be looking into some of them, of the emulators like Sega Saturn and Dreamcast, to check out how will it run on high resolution, because it is something we cannot do with the same, let's say, overall quality and price when it comes to some of those, let's say, cheaper game boxes. Pressing start, let's take a close look at some other things. System settings. So what actually are we running? So this HP ProDesk comes with a very nice temperature to begin with, 32 Celsius idle. Next up, this is an x64 one. Model number is the 8169. Linux version, But what is interesting, that this comes with an i5 6600T CPU running on 2.70 GHz. It's a quad core with a max frequency of 3500. So, and the graphics API is going to be in OpenGL ES 2.0 with the Mesa Intel HD Graphics 530. So not saying the best specification out there, but for the money, hey, we can't complain. So let's start off with some Panasonic 3DO. And the reason why is very simple, is because most of these, let's say, cheaper game boxes has problems running this. But with a mini PC of this, let's say, powerful M5 in the inside, we have no problem whatsoever, and we can just run it without any problem. I've been looking into the upscaling. There's not like a massive things you can do with upscaling. I think the original resolution was 640 by 480, and that's the only thing you can do with it. But I think it's pretty cool to just experience a couple of those hidden gems on here. But when it also comes to like the devices like handhelds, we have beautiful bezels, and I think it's one of those awesome ways to play. Of course, we can remove the bezels if you don't like these, but you don't need to buy a mini PC of this caliber to actually play these, let's say, basic Game Boy Advance games. Like I mentioned before, they run just fine actually, because on the cheaper game boxes we had the same result with just native resolution, with some bezels, without bezels, we had no problem whatsoever. So again, if you just love these, let's say, basic games, you can do it with a cheap game box, or with even maybe with a lesser and cheaper mini PC. So one thing you need to take into consideration, so when it comes to N64, sometimes we need to switch between emulators if you have some problems, but the overall performance on native resolution is so much better than your typical, let's say, Emulation cheap box. And I think that's absolutely a cool addition if you just want to enjoy some old school N64. Even all the way up to 4 players, it's possible. I will switch you to my buttons. That was always like the question, how did they map it? But with Cruis'n USA runs perfectly on this. I've noticed with some cheaper game boxes we had so many issues, and I think it was some time ago that I made this video saying that at the end of the game boxes era, and that's just simply because it is. You know, mini PCs has so much more to offer, and especially when you're looking at the prices, you're actually just paying now for them. And with games like Cruis'n USA run fine, it's just great to revisit these games. But it's also kind of funny, so let's do a different game of the N64 era, but this time let's put in rendering resolution of full HD. Okay, my buttons are completely messed up and I can hear the audio is just not running like it should be. But beside those problems, the game seems to be running just fine. Oh yeah, they're completely messed up. But when you're looking at this overall rendering resolution, it's really pushing this thing to the end with its capabilities, with the power. So I think 720p would be a better solution. And oh man, I'm trying to fix this freaking overall controller problem, because pressing right it will also switch to my different camera. But one of the cool things you can actually do with these, let's say, cheaper mini PCs, you can upscale PlayStation 1. So if you just want to revisit it and you don't have the horrible native resolution, we do have the option to all the way up to 720p. Take consideration depending on what kind of emulator and game you're running, maybe can even push it to 1080p. It's absolutely great to see what you can actually all do with this, and it looks absolutely stunning, to be honest, for an old game like this. So next up, PlayStation 2, and also this seems to be running fine. It is on native resolution. Upscaling is not going to be a great idea. I do see some screen tearing going on, so maybe we can fix that in the menu at the back end. But so far, it's absolutely great that we can see some, let's say, action on PlayStation 2 with just a mini PC of this price range. And that's the thing I just find very exciting, that we have so many mini PCs coming out of the market. They were actually e-waste, but you can just play so many cool things with. So like I mentioned before, if you're going to be slapping an SSD in here or an NVMe, you're installing some Batocera, you can play all the way up to PlayStation 2 without any problem. Of course, depending on what kind of game you actually go to be playing again, because some games are a little bit more demanding than the other one. But this i5 I think can run most of the games. But if you want to look into PlayStation 3, this is absolutely one of those downsides. I mean, particularly when it comes, let's say, the loading times. The powerful CPUs will handle this so much faster. It's time to get yourself a cup of tea. But what I noticed when it comes to PlayStation 3 emulation, I do see that it stutters all the time. And the overall performance you're getting in here is okay. It's still playable with some couple of games, but you can see with PlayStation 3, here we're finding his, let's say, absolutely like limitations. And again, if you're having two-dimensional games and stuff like that, that will work just fine most of the time. But this is not really playable to a certain point. Some parts are absolutely like nice looking, but you can just actually see when he's moving that it is like having a lot of screen tearing and doesn't run really smooth. Another system I wanted to see running is the PlayStation Portable. With 1080p rendering resolution, we do have some overall great performance. If this is going to be handling 4K, yeah, it's going to be squeezing out a lot of the CPU. But in the end, when you're looking at this, with this GPU-CPU combination, 1080p is absolutely great. So let's try this again, and now on 4K rendering resolution. And no problem whatsoever, so it's absolutely great to see. Of course, if having a God of War, there we're having maybe a little bit of a problem with the 4K rendering resolution, so you can always tweak for a certain game. It's absolutely great to see that we can just play all of these amazing games on higher resolutions on such a cheap device that we're using now. That promise a lot of cool things for in the future. And I mean particularly when some of these PCs are getting cheaper, and the fastest one out there, you're getting even, let's say, more possibilities for emulation. We do have some glitching or something. It looks like glitching, but no, I think it is supposed to be. But so, let's see what we can do with GameCube. So, also it has been set to the native resolution, no upscaling. I just wanted to check out simply this because we don't have a lot of power when it comes to these older CPU-GPU combinations. But it's absolutely amazing to see that we can actually just play some GameCube on this. Of course, we can also mess around with a couple of games. If we have two-dimensional games, we can maybe squeeze it all up. But so far, so good. An overall great performance. And I can just enjoy myself some F-Zero GX, one of my favorite games to play on the GameCube. It's, by the way, my first game that I actually ever bought. But for preservation, this is going to be absolutely awesome, because now we can actually enjoy those Xbox classic games, all of them. I really love to see myself playing some Kung Fu Chaos on this. Yeah, my original Xbox seems to be still working, but if I'm not going to be recapping these things in like the near future, we're having a lot of issues. And a couple of my Xboxes already died off, by the way. But seems to be working great on such a, let's say, low-powered older PC when it comes to emulation. So when it comes to the Dreamcast, I've been, let's say, tweaking around with it, but I've noticed when we're actually trying to get 4K rendering resolution, this mini PC doesn't like doing that. So I think the max for Sega Dreamcast will be 1080p. So you can just see that with different systems, we do have some very interesting, let's say, performance. But I can just enjoy it. It looks absolutely amazing. So let's move on to some Sega Saturn with the Yabashinshiro emulator and then setting it to 1080p. And without any problem, we can just enjoy yourself some Sega Saturn. And oh boy, this looks so much better if you're going to be like playing and comparing this with native resolution. And I think that's one of those amazing things that you can do with emulation. That you can just upscale it and look the old games look so much better. And again, with more power, we're even having more options going all the way to 4K, but so far 1080p is absolutely great performance. You can always like tweak for every single game, thinking like, hey, this particular game has a better compatibility, so we can maybe put it on 2K, 4K resolution. There's something you can always do if you have some more time. But so far, 1080p, yep, absolutely great. So if you want to have the same results, you should look into, let's say, the specification one I'm having over here, this i5. Other models can have a different configuration of ports at the back. But when you're looking at this particular product, I am really excited. This thing is really cheap to buy and
It's just ridiculous how good the overall emulation performance is. You can play so many different emulators, of course with some restrictions here and there. So I've been using the Xbox 360 controller most of the time with this review, actually playing thing, because this is my favorite, just not only the way how it plays, but also the compatibility with all of the emulators and Bata Zero itself. So the construction has been made fairly well, the way how you can upgrade it, but also the cooling, everything. The only downside I could find is the dongle from the display to HDMI that you need to buy. But besides that, enough USB ports, and you can basically build yourself a very cheap emulation beast. Thank you all for watching, consider subscribing, let me know in the comments what do you think of this, and it would be great to see you in the next video.